Good afternoon, everyone. This is the Glyphosate Commission meeting for May 23rd, 2022. I'd like to call the meeting to order. My name is Martin Suberg. I'm the Commissioner of the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection. It looks like we have all of the commission members here, but for purposes of the record, I'm going to call attendance and to verify that each of the members is here. So if I may, Mark Nascarella of DPH.
Hi, Commissioner. Mark Nascarella for Commissioner Margaret Cook, Department of Public Health, President.
Thank you, Mark. Division of Fisheries and Wildlife.
Good afternoon, Eve Schluter, Mass Wildlife, here for Director Mark Tiza.
Great, welcome. Department of Agricultural Resources.
Hi, John LeBeau, Commissioner of the Department of Ag Resources.
And our representative from the Trustees of Reservations.
Hi, Julie Richburg. Good afternoon, everyone.
Okay, so we have a quorum. As has been the case in our previous meetings, we're also joined by staff from, I know, at least DEP and the Department of Agricultural Resources. I'd particularly like to note Dr. Mark Smith of our Office of Research and Standards is with us today. And I know, John LeBeau, you might have staff from your team that you'd like to acknowledge.
Yeah, I expect one or both of our deputy commissioners, I believe Alicia Bouchard will be joining, and our Director of Crop and Pest Services, Taryn Lascola Minor, and possibly some folks from her team. I'm still working with Paul. Some of my folks are having difficulty getting in.
Fair enough. Okay. Well, thank you for that. So I'd like to make a motion to approve the minutes of our last meeting, which is March 8th, 2022, which members of the commission should have received previously. I'll make a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, I think John was slightly ahead, so we're John. Thank you very much. Any discussion on the minutes?
Commissioner.
Yes, Mark.
I'm sorry, Commissioner. I'd like to suggest a correction to the name of the DPH Commissioner. Commissioner's first name is spelled wrong, Commissioner Margaret Cook.
Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Yes, of course, we will correct that right away and make all the corrections and all the copies. Thank you for pointing that out to us. Okay, so with that typographical correction being noted and being made, can I take a vote? I'll start with Mark Nascarella of DPH.
Aye.
Okay. Eve?
Aye.
Okay. John?
Aye.
And Julie?
Hi.
And the chair votes aye as well. So the minutes are approved. Thank you very much. So now our next agenda item is a report from our consultant ERG on Phase One Deliverables. And I believe we'll be hearing from John Wilhelmi, the Vice President of Environmental and Occupational Health for ERG. And he'll provide an overview of Phase One. So with that, can we get John on the screen and give him screen sharing abilities if he needs it? Paul, do we see John out there?
John, sorry.
Wilhelmi.
Yeah. I am not. Oh, there he is. I'm promoting
Okay,
him to panelist. It may take a second. It's been spotty.
understood.
There we go.
Welcome, John. Sorry for the technical issues, but hopefully we see you and hopefully you see us and can hear us. And like I said, Paul, if John needs to share the screen, hopefully he has that ability as well.
Yeah, Paul, I would like to share some slides.
You should have the ability. Go ahead
Okay.
and try.
Let me see if this works. And Paul, I should mention that there are two other people on the line who will be speaking as well. One is Jerry Diamond and the other is Clifton Dawson-Sal. But they won't be speaking for a few minutes. So let's see. I'm trying to get this share screen. Okay, so I'm not sure if I'm frozen. It looks like oh, there it goes. You should be able to see my slides now.
Yes, we do.
Okay, so for today's meeting, we have prepared an update for you on the phase one activities for the glyphosate scientific review project to focus on phase one, which I'm happy to say is nearly complete. This update will cover the topics that are shown here, and it will take us about 40 to 45 minutes to go through the content. I think it will make sense for the commission members to ask questions during our presentation, but if you'd also like to hold them to the end, either way works for us. So as shown here, I want to start with introductions of our team members because there'll be two new faces that you see today. So my name again is John Wilhelmi. I'm Vice President of Environmental Occupational Health at ERG. For 26 years, I've been providing environmental health support services to state and federal agencies, and I'm the project manager. Clifton, I'm not sure if you are connected live, but I was hoping you could introduce yourself quickly.
Sure, yep, I'm here. So I'll briefly, my name is Clifton Dawson-Sal. I'm an environmental epidemiologist and board certified toxicologist at ERG. And I support state and federal agencies on risk assessments, tox reviews, epi studies, and I'll be supporting the review of the human health impacts of glyphosate for this work.
All right, thank you, Clifton. And then also on our line is a representative from our subcontractor for this project, and that company is Tetra Tech. So Jerry, would you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, this is Jerry Diamond. Can you hear me okay? Okay, and so I am a senior scientist with Tetra Tech in risk assessment and environmental toxicology, and I'm assisting here on the ecological side of this.
Okay, thank you, Jerry. So all three of us will speak at different times today, and we'll review the topics shown here. I'll start by quickly giving an overview of the phase one scope and schedule, and then Jerry and Clifton will do the bulk of the reporting on what we've already completed for phase one, and I'll wrap up with the final two topics. So my goal here really is to leave you with an understanding of exactly where we are with phase one, which will set the stage for our work in phase two. Briefly, I'll review some key parts of the scope of work. This is to a certain extent telling you what you already know, but I think it's important to remember our scope as we go through this. So big picture, we're conducting a scientific review of the potential human health and environmental impacts of glyphosate and its common alternatives. This project's been split into two phases. In this first phase, we had three charges. The first phase is basically to let you know the resources we will consider when we dive into the details in phase two. So in phase one, we're to provide a summary of available information on use of glyphosate and key alternatives. We're supposed to provide a list of assessments that we'll consider in phase two and a list of the stakeholders that we'll consult in phase two. And we'll report on all of that activity momentarily. And so again, phase one is presenting the resources we'll consider, and phase two is when we dive in, evaluate, synthesize, and report on the information. And then finally, before I hand this over to Jerry, I just wanted to review where we are with schedule. So we do have a complete internal draft of phase one ready. It's in my hands for final review. So the delay at this point is on me, but it will be finished this week. And at that point, our next deliverable for phase one will be to respond to any comments that the commission provides or any other designated parties by the commission provide. And we'll submit a final phase one report. And I'll talk about how next steps at the very end about how this will lead into phase two. But the final point I wanted to make, even though there's a little bit of work left to do on phase one, I'm happy to report that all signs indicate that we're going to finish phase one within the budget that was allotted. So that is all I had to report in terms of the big picture, the scope, and now we want to get into details. So again, we'll move into the first element of the scope for phase one, which is to compile information on the uses of glyphosate in the Commonwealth, as well as alternatives. So with that, I will hand this over to Jerry. And I think what I'll also do is at the end of each of these sessions is check with the commission on any questions. So let me, before Jerry, you start, check to see if anyone has questions on this brief intro.
I don't have any questions, but for me, your presentation seems frozen. So I'm not sure if other people are seeing that too.
Okay, it should say glyphosate uses and alternatives.
It's still on slide 2. It's not in presenter mode or anything.
Okay, let me present it this way. Can people see glyphosate uses and alternatives? Okay, so you'll see all the menu bar and so on. At least you'll have the content in front of you. Thank you for pointing that out. So Jerry,
Okay.
I'll turn this to you.
All righty. Thanks, John. Again, we're going to be telling you, as probably many of you already know in most cases. So glyphosate, of course, is the most widely used herbicide in the U.S. and certainly probably around the world. And especially over the last, I say 30, 25 years, it's been escalating, if anything, in its use, because it's very, very adaptable. It's applicable rather to many kinds of uses because of its mechanism of action and the way that it's actually applied. So it's a systemic herbicide, and so it's able to basically kill almost any kind of plant because of the way that it acts, including some microorganisms. It's what we say non-selective. But for weed controls of all kinds, it's been very widely used. Of course, especially it's used in row crop production. Corn, soybeans, hay, pasture is where nationally it's been used a lot, but also in many other kinds like fruit growing, nursery operations, residential and commercial landscaping. You think of Roundup, that's one of the biggest selling herbicides ever. Of course, also rights of way. And so what we've looked at are sources from several places so far in phase one, including MDAR, of course, as well as University of Massachusetts, U.S. Geological Survey as well, which has some good information on usage, but mostly from the agricultural sector. Okay, so we're not, so far, not as much information available quantitatively anyway for some of these other uses. Okay, there are, again, the reason for the systematic herbicides being so popular, like glyphosate, is because it's usually lower cost to apply in the sense that you only have to apply maybe once in a season, since it kills the entire plant, including the roots. So it can be more effective than other alternatives. And we have been looking at, I think the next slide, John, can you go to that? Yeah, so there are many other alternatives that we've begun to look at in phase one. Many chemical alternatives that apparently are at least registered and perhaps used in Massachusetts for various applications. Many of them are more specific in their application than glyphosate. In other words, they can maybe used for mostly certain kinds of crops and so forth. But we did present in phase one, we're looking at some options for prioritizing these chemical alternatives. And we're looking in phase two, maybe for looking at perhaps using especially stakeholder input to try to figure out, what sort of alternatives we should be using here to prioritize some of these other chemical alternatives. So I'm not sure if you skipped slide 2 here, John, but okay. But in any case, we are looking at some of these other ones. Okay, thank you. No, that's okay. Slide.
Okay.
Yeah, the next slide, I mean, yeah, slide 8.
Okay.
Okay, so we are looking at for other alternatives. We're looking at various kinds of mechanical as well as biological. There are bioherbicides that are sort of coming online more, so we're looking at that as well. So there's lots more to do here in phase 2 to do more, especially working with stakeholders on trying to figure out what are some of these other alternatives that we should be really focusing on in phase 2. So I think I'll stop there. Any questions?
Okay. And Jerry, I should point out, I've had the benefit of seeing the phase 1 report, but it does have a list of all the chemical, biological, mechanical, physical alternatives that have been identified. But the challenge is to whittle that down to a list of those that are most relevant for Massachusetts.
Right. And I should just point out that glyphosate isn't only used for killing things. Okay, there are other salts of glyphosate that are used also for ripening fruit, in a certain way or more rapidly or something. So there are other uses of glyphosate as well.
Okay. So again, there will be a lot more detail in the report, but let me stop before I transition to Clifton, who's going to talk about the specific resources on human health impacts, to see if anyone has questions for Jerry about that quick bird's eye view of the glyphosate uses alternatives. Okay. So Clifton, I'm about to have you get started. It did seem like there was a little bit of a delay when I switched slides, so I'll wait for your cue to switch slides on this. But just so everyone knows, Clifton is going to be talking about the resources that we intend to evaluate in phase 2 specific to human health impacts. And after he's finished, we'll go back to Jerry, who will do the same thing for environmental health impacts. So this will get a lot more specific in terms of the information that we'll consider. So Clifton, I'll start here, but I'll wait for your cue to switch slides from this point forward.
Thanks, Sean. So I'll briefly present on the list of key assessments that we propose reviewing and summarizing as a part of phase 2. And consistent with the scope of work, we considered key assessments to include recent assessments that were published by recognized authorities, peer-reviewed publications, and precedential judicial decisions. And we compiled a list of assessments and relevant publications from a diverse set of resources, which include state and federal government agencies, agencies from selected foreign countries, international bodies, NGOs. Importantly, as a part of phase 2, we'll consider the fact that the various assessments had different scopes and methodologies. The assessments were based on literature reviews that covered different time periods. They had different inclusion criteria, different goals. For example, whether the assessments were hazard-based or risk-based, whether the risk being evaluated was risk of pesticide residues in food or the risk to pesticide applicators. And these differences will be noted and factored into our synthesis of information on the human health impacts. Next slide. And our list is going to begin with assessments issued by federal and state authorities in the US. EPA has periodically reassessed the health risks of glyphosate and will review the multiple documents posted to EPA's docket on glyphosate. And it'll include the most recent registration review decision to list glyphosate, an accompanying human health risk assessment, other supporting documents like their most recent response to comments. We'll consider the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry's toxicological profile, which has been developed and was published in 2017. NTP is the National Toxicology Program. It's a part of the Department of Health and Human Services. And NTP periodically publishes a report on carcinogens. And although they haven't classified the carcinogenicity of glyphosate yet, they have released some limited results on their sort of internal toxicity studies, and will evaluate any data that gets released as they're expected to release some more data this year. The U.S. Forest Services within the Department of Agriculture has also evaluated the toxicity of various pesticides in support of their mission, and they've produced the 2011 Human Health and Ecological Risk Assessment that we'll review. The National Cancer Institute and the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences funds this large ongoing prospective epi-study called the Agricultural Health Study, which follows pesticide applicators and their spouses. And it's one of the largest health studies on glyphosate, and will review important publications that have come out of this study linking use to cancer incidence. In 2017, Cal EPA proposed a no significant risk level for glyphosate under the state's Safe Drinking Water and Toxic Enforcement Act, which is called Prop 65. They've also proposed some changes to the wording of warnings on glyphosate containing products as a result of some recent sort of judicial cases. And the public comment period for that just ended this month. And so we'll review any documents, any recent documents that come out of that evaluation. Next slide.
And Clifton, one thing to point out quickly, the tox profile for glyphosate was issued in 2020, but it considered literature that they finished their lit search in 2017. So that was the reason for the different dates.
Oh yeah, sorry about that.
No problem.
And we'll also evaluate assessments that were issued by different international bodies. The International Agency for Research in Cancer, IARC. It's an agency within the World Health Organization that, among other functions, issues monographs that classify substances by their human carcinogenic potential. And we'll review the monograph on glyphosate that was issued in 2017. Multiple assessments were conducted by the EU. The European Food Safety Authority, EFSA, completed a human health risk assessment in 2015. There were further evaluations that are being conducted, that are ongoing, as the current approval of use for glyphosate expires at the end of this year in December. And so we'll review anything that has been released and that might be released during phase 2 that comes out of these groups. In May 2016, some subcommittees from the UN and the World Health Organization convened a panel to evaluate human health risks of consuming food products that contain pesticide residues, and a summary report was released that considered the health risks of glyphosate. Next slide. We'll also review some reviews by select countries outside the EU, specifically assessments by some governing authorities in Canada, Japan, and Australia, all of which authorized the use of glyphosate containing products. In Canada, some recent court rulings have directed Health Canada to reconsider certain procedural aspects of glyphosate's reauthorization. And so in addition to the most recent assessment, we'll review any new assessment documents that may be issued. For Japan, a complete human health risk assessment of different commercial grades of glyphosate has been released, but it's only available in Japanese. But we'll review an English document that sort of summarizes the conclusions. In Australia, we'll review a regulatory position paper that came out on whether the country should reevaluate its authorization of glyphosate. Next slide. And so the major assessments that were reviewed in the previous section were completed in different years, and they considered peer-reviewed literature issued through different cutoff dates. And so for phase 2, we'll also conduct a literature search to identify recent peer-reviewed publication on glyphosate's human health impacts. We'll prepare a memo for review by the Commission before executing the search, but we anticipate conducting the task under PubMed search engine and focusing on the most recent 5 years of publication. Keywords for the search will include different terms for glyphosate, various health outcomes, other targeted terms, and we'll we'll sort of turn to a recent literature review by EPA to identify some useful keywords. Following the search, we'll compile the publications in a reference management system. We'll review titles and abstracts for relevance, and then come up with a final list of publications that will summarize more thoroughly in the report. Next slide. To identify precedential judicial decisions, we had an attorney within ERG execute a search for case law using the case text research platform, which covers federal and state cases and other legal proceedings. A few hundred cases were identified in this initial search, a subset of which were filed in the last 5 years. EPA was a party in a handful of the cases. And we kind of just wanted to highlight some points, such as that no case law was identified for glyphosate in Massachusetts State Court. Two of the most litigated issues included either product liability or negligence cases. Sort of our initial scan, the product liability cases are rooted in what should be included in different product labels and whether the plaintiffs were properly warned about the health and ecological issues. The negligence case claims are centered around plaintiffs' ability to show that the products containing glyphosate are the actual cause of their health effects. Most of the tort law cases focused on cancer outcomes, particularly like lymphoma. A handful of regulatory law cases were also identified. Importantly, there's some legal proceedings related to EPA's interim registration review decision for glyphosate. And so during phase 2, we'll review any relevant documents that are part of this proceeding and the various other cases that were identified. And next slide, I'm all set.
I'll ask a procedural question. I do see that there's a question that's been asked in the chat. I'm not sure if we answer the commission questions first or go through those as well. I don't know if it was directed to just me or if everyone has access to that. But
yeah, I think you can, I saw that in the chat and I was going to get to it as well, just to make sure. I think that's the first question we've had either from commission or public. So if it feels like now's a good time to address it, I would encourage you to do it. Let's try to make sure that we're answering as many questions as we can.
Okay, so I'll get to that question in a minute, but Clifton just revealed our hand, so to speak, in terms of the resources that we'll consider when reviewing the evidence of glyphosate-related human health impacts. So I thought I'd stop and check to see if any of the commission members have questions about this range of resources that we'll consider. Okay. I'll check again at the end, but it's a pretty standard list in terms of the entities that are authorities for issuing assessments on toxic substances that we will bolster with the literature search to confirm that we haven't left anything out by focusing on the assessments that have these cutoff dates in maybe 5 years ago or so. The glyphosate is a constantly changing landscape in terms of the literature that's out there. So that is the approach for this. For the question that was asked, it's one regarding alternatives that asks if we are going to be considering cost economics when looking at the alternatives. I don't think that was in our scope of work, that we're to be looking at the human health environmental impacts of glyphosate and the alternatives. I see some nodding, so now if we happen to come across information that we could report on easily, we will, but this is not a full economic impact analysis of the different alternatives that are out there. Okay, So what we just went through though with Clifton's presentation, again, was revealing our hand in terms of what information resources we're going to consider on human health impacts. Those are all enumerated in the draft report, every single one of them with citations and so on. So you'll have the ability to really dig in and comment further. We're especially interested if people think we left anything out. But let me transition here to the environmental impacts. And the division of labor on our end of things is that ERG has been leading the human health impacts work, and our subcontractor Tetra Tech is leading the work on the environmental impacts. So Jerry, I'll switch to you. And again, I'll start on this first slide and I'll wait to hear from you before advancing these.
Okay, thanks, John. Yeah, and also just to add to what John just said, also in the chat, we have already started, at least on the environmental side, to look at alternatives from an environmental impact perspective too. So that I think that is part of our scope. John, correct me if I'm wrong. Okay, yeah, sounds like it is. So we are looking at that, but as John said, not so much the economics, I don't think.
Yeah, and I think that answers the follow-up question that was put into the chat.
Right. I mean, I just will say, however, that and this comes out too in this section here of this presentation, that some of the sources that we have been starting to look at in phase one, such as Massachusetts Highway Department, the railways and the right-of-ways, for example, their vegetation management plans do talk somewhat, at least tangentially, about the economics of these other alternatives, as opposed to using something like glyphosate. So to that extent, I mean, we are at least, mentioning that, but that's about it. So as far as the key assessments, we have a list right now of about 25 different environmental assessments that we've identified, including from federal agencies. Of course, US EPA is a major one, but also USDA, US Forest Service. Glyphosate is used in forestry as well. Also from the European Union, they are in the process right now of re-reviewing glyphosate for the same sort of reasons as in the United States. So you have the European Chemical Association and the European Food Safety Authority looking into that. They're expected to have at least a draft reassessment here, maybe late this year or next year. Of course, MDR has done their own. It's now a little old, but it's still useful. And then we use many peer-reviewed journal articles, which is just the tip of the iceberg for now. There are many out there, and I think as John just mentioned too, this is now a very hot topic in the public, publications. So we did identify some of those, as well as NGOs that have also, I wouldn't call them exactly always environmental assessments, but they certainly relate to that. And I've listed just a couple here that are also there. Most of the environmental or ecological assessments definitely rely on EPA's work. EPA came out in 2020 with their interim registration review decision. And much of the work that's going on right now is trying to make that final. But as I think was already mentioned, there are some lawsuits pending, not maybe on the environmental side, but on the other sides of this. So that's still going in process, but that is publicly available, it's been commented on. If I have the next slide, John. So EPA, as some of you I think know on this, they go through, can you go back a slide, John? That's slide, there you go. Okay, EPA relies on their, FIFRA, that's the act that controls pesticides and manages them, registers them. And the FIFRA by the act really focuses on the active ingredient when doing environmental assessments. And same may be true as well, by the way, on the human health side. So, so the other kinds of effects, for example, effects on non-target species, while they're included to a certain extent qualitatively in these risk assessments by EPA, not so much quantitatively, not as much as they are with the direct effects of looking at toxicity, for example, of glyphosate as an active ingredient. The other part is species habitat. That's a huge area now. The indirect effects on species habitat, particularly honeybees, monarch butterflies, and that's where things are getting pretty focused right now. Also, FIFRA focuses on the active ingredient. So like I said, it doesn't include mixtures of pesticides that may occur in products that are actually used, or the adjuvants, surfactants particularly. And this has become a big thing, I think, in certain other risk assessments that we think are out there, where it might be that the adjuvants are more toxic than glyphosate. So if I can have the next slide. So in phase 2, there's more that can be done. We think conducting a more thorough literature search, especially focuses on some of these uncertainties, indirect effects on threatened and endangered plant species, for example, and that sort of thing, where glyphosate has been, thought to be a factor in affecting those sorts of things. So that's something we want to look at. And also, so far with ERG, we're trying to look at other presidential judicial decisions that may be on the environmental side. We've only started looking at that in phase 1. So that's something that we would probably try to do more in phase 2. And again, try to rely on stakeholders to give us some information on that as well. So I'll stop there.
Okay, thanks, Jerry. And I actually forgot to mention, after Clifton talked about the case law research, that we did identify a handful of cases that do cite the Endangered Species Act and the Plant Protection Act. So that will fold into the work that Tetra Tech considers on the precedential decisions. And we'll share those with you, Jerry, as we move forward. So we're about to shift gears again, but I see that Eve has a question. So why don't I call on you and we'll move forward when the time is right.
Thank you. Just following up on the environmental impacts piece and the notion of impacts on listed species, I think it's important to also review how glyphosate might be used to promote habitats for some of our most listed species or most imperiled species, and some of that side of when glyphosate might be used versus like direct impact. So just as you're talking to stakeholders and gathering information, having an understanding as to the purpose for use and how that might relate to environmental impacts if glyphosate, for example, or a suitable alternative were not be able to be used to promote some of these rare habitats.
All right, thank you. Jerry, did you have any follow-up comments or questions based on that?
No, that's a great question. And that's Jess, I agree. Yeah, we will. That's a great question.
Okay, Julie.
Thank you. I think similar to Eve's comment, and just to keep in mind as we're thinking about alternatives and the environmental impacts of alternatives, including even those mechanical alternatives and the impacts that they may have on habitat over using glyphosate or another chemical alternative.
Yeah, that's a great point. And yes, we are certainly looking at mechanical alternatives and their pros and cons, as well as other kinds of, like I said, bioherbicides, what they call non-chemical herbicides. These are things organic farming might use, for example, as opposed, again, pros and cons, as well as glyphosate. So it needs a comparison.
Okay. Any other questions for Jerry in terms of, well, I should mention first, the list of assessments are enumerated in this draft report that you'll be seeing very soon. Again, we'll be interested in anything that you think shouldn't be on the list or should be added that's not there. And let me just check to see if there's any final questions for him before I shift gears one more time.
There was a question in the chat about, and I think you partially, I think you started getting to the answer of it, but are you looking at impacts of different application methods in the study?
That's a great question. We certainly have mentioned that in the phase one report, but of course we haven't looked at it in detail yet. I think that to a certain extent, I think we can, but I will ask John if this is within the scope or not. But yes, I mean, certainly there's some of that would have to be dealt with, I think, in phase two. Yeah.
Yeah, I do think so, to the extent we have data supporting the relative quantities by different application methods. Do we have access to that?
I'm not aware of it.
Okay.
It may be somewhere.
Okay. So
as we said before, we don't have, or at least at the moment, we don't have data much at all for non-agricultural crop uses.
Right.
All those other uses that we mentioned. Right now, that's a gap that we would like hopefully to fill in phase two.
Yep. Okay. I'm not seeing any other questions, so I'll move into this final phase. Again, phase one, we're to report on information we have on uses and alternatives, the assessments we'll consider both for human health and environmental impacts, and then also the stakeholders that we intend to contact for the phase two work. Now, I should point out that our scope directs us to contact stakeholders, but it doesn't necessarily explain why. So what we wanted to do first before identifying the stakeholders was to compile the reasons why are we reaching out to them before we actually come up with a list. So we identified a few reasons here. I'm reasonably confident that our work on phase one has identified all the major assessments and has an approach for identifying key publications issued since those, but we will ask nonetheless to be comprehensive in this effort to identify any additional scientific publications from the stakeholders. It's clear to us that some of the assessments are ongoing, as well as some of the long-term epidemiological studies. And we know of some assessments that are anticipate issuing reports later this year. So we will ask questions about the research and works in progress to the extent we could get that information on the substance of those. But if not, at the very least, to understand when these assessments will be issued. And then finally, I think it's important for us to understand what issues are of greatest interest to the various parties and stakeholders at play. And we want to ask about that such that our scientific review can speak to those topics to the extent appropriate and to the extent it falls within our scope. So that's the why. And then based on that, we came up with a list of some categories of stakeholders to contact, and there's 4 listed here. The scientific leads of major assessments, the Massachusetts parties that have the responsibility for registering pesticides, and then non-government organizations, including those that have voiced concern about glyphosate use, as well as those that can be reasonably anticipated to represent those who use glyphosate. And this table shows who we've come up with for the list that we propose to contact during phase 2. In terms of the scientific leads of assessments, our report actually has the names of the individuals that we intend to contact. So it spans the National Cancer Institute. The reason why we have someone from that organization is because they played a role in the IARC monograph, which is pretty important for this topic. And they also are funding the agricultural health study. So anyhow, contacts from the National Cancer Institute, Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry, Environmental Protection Agency, as well as principal investigators for the agricultural health study. In terms of the parties that have responsibility for registering pesticides in Massachusetts, We landed on the pesticide board subcommittee, and there are 4 different parties. I think technically there might be 5 members with 2 from DPH, but we would ask the agencies involved about which individual they would like us to speak with, as well as a public member that serves on that board. In terms of non-government organizations, so for those that have voiced concern about glyphosate, we did a Google search. I think the terms were Massachusetts concern glyphosate, and some rose to the top in terms of those that have published concerns that are at least easily searchable online, and 4 are listed here. And John, I see you've raised your hand. Let me check with you. Do you have a question about anything I mentioned?
Yeah, on this slide where you're indicating the organizations that you might be contacting, I should also suggest that the Cape Cod Cranberry Growers Association, very large commodity group, which employs use of herbicide, including glyphosate. So I think that organization should be included as well.
Thank you.
Sure, and we can provide any kind of contact information that you might need.
Okay. Yeah, and again, you will, all the commission members will have the opportunity to look at the draft of the Phase 1 report that lists these entities, and I'll add that one before we submit this. It will go in that final box in the lower right-hand corner of the organizations that can be reasonably anticipated to represent users of glyphosate. And so we'll add it to that list. And then I should point out at the very bottom, these 4 categories didn't necessarily bring into play the range of stakeholders that might be important for the work on environmental impacts. So we've added 2 there that Jerry and his group would likely contact for information on the environmental impacts. So this is a list. The Q&A kind of exploded at this point, so I could look through. Okay. So someone suggested contacting the New England chapter or the International Society of Arboriculture or the Utility Arborists Association for Utility Right-of-Way Issues. I think it's a good suggestion. And there's a question about what people at local health departments can do now when responding to Massachusetts citizens who are concerned about the use of glyphosate. And I think that might be a question that's better suited for the commission members to answer. Perhaps. So that's the final question that I think everyone might have access to.
And I think I did want to make one note. I see Eve has her hand up, and I'm going to resume this in a moment. But I saw in the chat we were joined by Representative Gentile, and you know, unfortunately, he had to sign off. As you know, this is an area of keen interest to him. And Representative Dom is also here. From the Joint Environment and Natural Resources Committee, and we welcome you and thank you for your participation. Eve, anything you want to ask?
Well, I was just going to add to that 4th box there in the lower right-hand corner of organizations representing users. You were mentioning, you know, NGOs that use it. I think what's missing from this is really sort of habitat managers. And so there are a lot of NGOs that manage habitat across the Commonwealth. And so it would be good to gain their perspective. I see you have us listed at the bottom as a plus. So I just want to make sure, though, that other NGOs are potentially represented, and I see that fellow commission member Julie added some potential organizations in the chat that are sort of broader scale and deal with these kinds of issues too. So.
Okay. I'm trying to monitor the chat as well, but the point is taken about the habitat managers, the organizations that represent those. And Jerry, I'll work with you to see if we could come up with some candidates there. And a procedural question, Commissioner, I can't remember the first name of the person who was handling the logistics. Was it Paul?
Paul Locke.
Yeah, if we could get a printout or an email with the chat content, both the chat and the Q&A, that would be much appreciated.
Sure, easily done.
I didn't hear that last point.
He said yes, easily done. So you should be all set. Well, Paul will make it a point to provide that to you.
Okay. So this is the last prong, if you will, of the phase one work in terms of the uses alternatives, the resources we consider, the stakeholders we propose contacting. So that brings me to our final slide, which is a quick overview of our progress. So I've listed here for the next steps for the phase one report, which again, we'll submit it in draft form this week. I assume the commission will provide feedback at a time that's appropriate, and we would immediately turn around a final report. We would then await the authorization to proceed with phase two. I think from a contractual purpose, we had that in place for phase one only. So once we have that, we'll move forward to phase two. That's when we execute the research that we've outlined for phase one in terms of reviewing all these assessments, conducting the literature search, contacting the stakeholders, and so on. I think this outline phase for phase two will be particularly important. It will be a very detailed outline. We want to make sure we haven't left anything out of interest. After which we'll proceed down the path of preparing a draft and final reports. We're really eager to begin that phase of work, but I realize that wrapping up phase one really is our immediate priority. So let me stop there and see if there are any further questions.
Okay, and just to clarify again, we can anticipate getting the draft phase one report sometime this week. Okay,
Yes.
not to put you on the spot, but
No, that's fine.
That's what you said, yeah. And then then that would give us, we would post it on our website, and that would give us an opportunity, the commission members to review it. And I hear what you're saying. I mean, you're interested in moving to phase two, as are we. So it puts a little bit of responsibility on us in the commission to make sure that we're, reading this and providing our feedback, which I would suspect would take the form of another commission meeting like this, so that, we're meeting our transparency goals, in the near future.
Very good. Yeah, and the reports right now is 35 pages long. I intend to trim a little bit of the content, so it'll be in the 20 to 30 page range that we submit.
Okay. Comments or questions from the commission members? Not hearing any. I don't know if we've stayed up on all the questions that have come in on the chat. Let's see. We got one question here about how long will what you've outlined looks like a very thorough risk assessment, as it will take a long time to complete this. Oh, that's the health department question. Yeah, that's the one that I think the commission is going to have to think about with all of you. There's more. It looks like there's more recommendations about the members. I see a comment here from, Sarah, that, folks are interested in seeing the phase one report. And again, we intend to be transparent about that. I don't know. I think, are there other questions? I'm not seeing any, or okay. Not seeing any. And then, I did want to, again, it's great that we've had members of the legislature join us. Representative Dom, I know you've been with us for this entire time. Any comments you'd like to make to the commission here while we are at this point? Is that something, Paul, you can arrange to do?
Sure. Okay. Who am I looking for again? Sorry.
Representative Dom.
Um,
Oh, I see. We just got something through the chat. Thank you for that. And thank you for the comment from the committee. We appreciate that. So I think we're all set.
Okay.
Okay. Very good. So we will then, and again, I'll ask this of the commission members. What we'll do is we'll get the draft report. We'll post it on our website, and then we, as commission members, will read it, and we will look for a meeting in the foreseeable future to provide whatever final comments so that ERG and the ERG team can finalize this. So we'll be, after this meeting, looking for times to set up the next commission meeting. Doesn't look like there are any other comments or questions. Well, it was a good discussion, and you said you were going to make the report a little shorter, although I don't know, you got so many good recommendations that we'll see where it finally ends up, but people had a lot of good ideas about contacts and resources. So that was a useful part of the discussion. So John, thank you. Thank you, Jerry. Thank you, Clifton, for your presentation today. And we look forward to continuing this work. And as you rightly pointed out, moving on to phase two.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. With that, I think the next item was, and I might look for a little bit of help from Ann Lowry here. One of the next agenda item was obviously thinking ahead to the funding of phase two. And I believe that's work that DAR and DEP have to, there's two tracks. The appropriation we got for this commission was $50,000. And as we know from our previous work together, we're going to go well beyond that. I think to the tune of about $128,000 additionally. And so at the last meeting, both Commissioner LeBeau and I have indicated that we are looking for, agency resources to keep the work going, even as we hopefully will be able to be, get some additional funding. So, reimbursed, if you will, the agency accounts that we're looking to take this funding from to keep the work moving. So I think we'll be, hopefully by the time we get to the next meeting, each of our agencies will have done some more work. I know, John, I know you've been doing some thinking about that. Anything you want to add right now?
First, I should go off of mute. Thank you. Well, as mentioned, I mean, $50,000 appropriation, I believe we've already spent approximately 25, leaving a balance of 150. I think we found some assets within the departments at our first pass or our second pass, and we're continuing we're continuing to look, but it's a substantial amount of money. And I note that Rep. Gentile, who sponsored that legislation, has left us before he heard this, but I did happen to bump into him. Eve and I were at an event with him last Friday, and we had a quick sidebar on a few matters relative to the commission, including this.
Mhm. Okay, so we'll keep working on that and more upcoming meetings. Okay, then the last, I guess the second to last agenda item is other business. And I think most of these are updates that I think, involve correspondence we've recently received. I'd note that I believe, and if I'm mischaracterizing it, but I believe we got a letter from the Bayer company requesting whether there'll be an opportunity to comment on reports from ERG or provide materials for reviews. I think, as you've seen today, we are trying to proceed in a transparent fashion. Again, our intent is to make all of the information that's being produced available. As we get further into the discussion, I know there's going to be questions and people are going to want to comment on that. So we will make sure that we are providing that opportunity for parties. I note, and I think this was already taken care of, we did get a letter from Ed Stockman as well. He had material that he was hoping would make it that for ERG's consideration. I noticed in ERG's presentation that it looked like they'd made comment, but I know Ann Lowry will be able to, verify that as we move forward.
That's right. This is Ann. And I did share the information that was provided by Mr. Stockman with our fellow commissioner over at DAR and his staff. And that information was shared with ERG. So I believe that's been taken care of and will be considered among all the assessments that the ERG is reviewing.
Okay.
That
And
answers
then-
your question.
I'm sorry. No, thank you for that.
Mhm.
And then, John, I believe there was one last piece of correspondence that we wanted to highlight as having received.
Yes, thank you. I want to just inform the commission that over the past few months, MDR has been contacted by representatives of industry asking us to take a look at our sensitive materials list. This is a list of pesticides that can be used in, as the name suggests, in certain situations where we want to be employ more care. And the industry pretty much uses this list exclusively in the rights of way, just so they don't have to keep, for logistical purposes, they don't have to keep switching back between products. Industries flag that there are, as we all hear the phrase, global supply chain issues. There are shortages of several registered products, including glyphosate. Several products, registered products, have been discontinued by manufacturers. So they're flagging concern about availability of product for this year. So I just wanted to make the commission aware that we've received this correspondence. We and DEP are just barely scratching the surface of this, to take a look at it and to consider it, and we'll keep the commission advised.
Thank you, John. Okay. Then let me ask, is there any other business that any of the commission members would like to bring before the commission? Not seeing or hearing any. Then I think our last item is adjournment. Again, thank you everybody for your time and engagement. And again, we will be looking to schedule a follow-up meeting in the near future. But in the meantime, thank you for your engagement, and I will make a motion to adjourn. Do I have a second?
Second,
Okay. Any discussion? Not hearing any. I think we'll go by show of hands. All in favor of adjournment? Let the record show that it was unanimous. And I thank the commission for the time today, and I look forward to our work together in the near future. Thank you, everybody.
thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Commissioner.